Hey everyone, before we get started talking about the Coalition app, we wanted to let you know that you can calculate your chances of admission at a variety of different schools using our chancing engine. First, you'll start by completing your chancing profile with information that's reflected throughout the Coalition app, such as GPA, testing, and extracurricular activities. From there, you can use CollegeVine's Hub tool to see your chances and information about different schools, such as cost, majors, and more. Visit the link in the description below to sign up and see your chances today.
Next up, we have the demographic information, okay? And so here, this is something that looks very similar to the demographic information section on the Common application. First up, they ask if you're Latino or Hispanic. And so you can select yes or no, depending on whether you identify as Hispanic. And as far as what options you choose, right? All of these are fair game. Obviously, just choose the ones that apply to you, and you can choose multiple. So if you have, a mix of all these heritage, you definitely can, right? Select all of them. But one thing to keep in mind is that if you select that you're from Spain and that's where your Hispanic heritage comes from, that's not going to be treated the same as if you select one of these other types. In general, students who have a background from Spain tend to be treated as, as white students by a lot of colleges, right? So insofar as, colleges are looking to recruit underrepresented minority students, and Hispanic students are one of those underrepresented minority groups, putting Spain and just Spain isn't necessarily going to get you that benefit. So it's really up to you as far as whether you select it, and you can kind of specify your other background if you feel like there's something missing here. But the vast majority of Hispanic or Latino backgrounds do come from these various countries. Okay. Then next up, they're going to separately ask for your race, ethnicity on the basis of whether you're Native American, American Indian or Alaskan Native, Asian, Black or African American, including Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, Afro-Caribbean origin, as well as Native American or other Pacific Islander, Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander, and white, including Middle Eastern. So if you're from North Africa, that's going to be considered Black, but if you're from the Middle East, that's going to be considered white, even though both groups technically have kind of Arabic heritage, right? Now, one thing I will say is that in general, right, there obviously are differences in how students are treated in the admissions process based on their racial and ethnic background. And these effects vary from school to school, though in general, right, at many colleges, they are looking to increase their representation and their support for underrepresented minority students, which for most of these schools include Native Americans, Black or African American students, as well as Hispanic students, right? So if you're in one of those three groups, just kind of put your racial background in and you can move forward, right? Now, if you're Asian American, right, sometimes at selective colleges, there is a bit of a penalty that you pay for being Asian American, right? It is a harder admissions process for you as an Asian American student at some elite colleges and some selective colleges. Grand total of probably between 50 and 100 colleges where even relative to, say, white students, you're going to be held to a higher standard. Now, so with those sort of schools in mind, right, often many students are tempted to not select Asian, right, especially if they are, biracial or partly Asian, even though if you're both Asian and white, you're usually treated as Asian by colleges, right? Now, you certainly can choose to identify this however you want. However, the thing I will say is that in general, say that you have like a white passing Asian name, right? So your name is John Smith and your dad's name is Mark Smith or something like that, and your mom's name is Jane Smith, right? Maybe it's possible to pull it off, but even then, someone in your recommendation letters or something in your extracurricular profile might trigger, hey, this is an Asian student. And if you, try to hide your Asian heritage, that's going to come off worse than just being Asian and kind of taking the penalty that comes from that, right? And if your parents or even you have a name that kind of betrays your ethnic background, then there's not even really an option to kind of skip around it. So that would be my general advice, is that just put down what your background actually is, right? At the end of the day, the colleges have other ways of proxying this data, and they're always trying to proxy this data if you don't provide it, right? Separately, if you are biracial or multiracial, in general, if you have Black, Hispanic, or Latino or Native American, Black, Hispanic, or Native American heritage, you're typically going, and you're biracial with white or with Asian backgrounds, you're typically going to be treated as Black, Hispanic, or Native American. Conversely, if you're Asian and white, you're typically going to be treated as Asian. And yeah, those are kind of the big categories as far as being biracial. So in general, you should just put down all the racial backgrounds that you sort of have. And that's my broader advice about this demographic section. Next up, we have the languages section. And so this is where you can enter in all the different languages that you know. And my sort of general notion of what is proficient in these languages is if you could hold a conversation with someone who speaks that language and hold an entire conversation. And now, obviously, it shouldn't just be like, hi, what is your name? Nice to meet you. But at the same time, it doesn't have to be, a in-depth debate about the local politics of that country, right? It's somewhere in between those, right? If you could hold a conversation that's maybe 10 sentences back and forth or 15 sentences back and forth, I would call that spoken proficiency, right? And certainly, right, you're able to enter in different languages and enter in your proficiency level, right? You can choose spoken only, you can choose written only, you can choose fluent, obviously, and you can choose native. So in my case, right, I would probably say that, for example, I speak English. English is, I guess, my native language. I also speak Telugu, and I'm fluent in Telugu. I speak Tamil, and I'm fluent in that. And then I speak Spanish, and there I'm going to put, that I am, proficient at Spanish in spoken only terms, right? Now, one thing to kind of keep in mind is that Spanish was a language that I took in high school, so I have that proficiency from my high school experience. In general, if you've spent 4 or 5 or 6 years in a language class, it is going to be a bit of a red flag if you aren't even able to put that you're proficient at the spoken level in Spanish, right? And then obviously they're going to ask what the primary language you speak at home is. And so in my case, that would have been Telugu, but it really is just up to whatever your family situation is, right? Now, the next segment that we are going to take a look at is the citizenship information. And so in the citizenship information, they're going to ask if you're a U.S. citizen or a U.S. national. They're going to ask if you have dual citizenship and then make you list your other citizenships. And then they'll ask where you were born. So in this case, I was born in the United States, in Michigan, in fact, in Ann Arbor, home of the University of Michigan. But ultimately, it's up to you. Obviously, you just have to answer based on your family background. Now, next up, they're going to be asking questions about your family information. So, for example, right, they're going to want to know who lives in your household. So if you have parents or guardians, right, and guardians includes like foster parents or something like that, obviously siblings, spouses if you're married, though I'm sure many of you in the audience are probably not married, children if you have them, but again, same principle, and just me. Household size, same principle. So if you just live with your mom, it'll be just you and your mom, 1, 2, right? Whereas if you have siblings and your parents still live together, that could be 4, so on and so forth, right? So you just enter that here. And then you basically, next step that you take a look at is, both your parents and your guardians versus who do you live with, right? So both your parents and guardians, parent 1 and guardian 1, basically one of your 2 parents or guardians, or a ward of the state or of the court. That's, where if you're in the foster system or if you're, in an orphanage or something like that, then that's kind of where you would select ward of the state. They also want to know about your parents' marital status, right? And if you don't know, I would just select other and just say, I don't know, right? But in most cases, these are kind of the options here, right? If your parent has died, you got to share that information, right? If not, you're going to enter in their first name, last name, relationship to you, email address, parent address, right? Country, phone number, essentially, and then highest level of education. So in this case, let's say that they had a master's degree, so on and so forth. And unlike the Common App, you're actually not able to enter in the different colleges that your parent attended. So it's a little bit harder to communicate kind of your legacy status at a given college because you can't do it here. So just keep that in mind. That's one of the key differences between the Common App and the Coalition App. Then you got to share their occupation and position, place of work, and their birth country. You can add multiple parents and guardians. So it's completely up to you. And then finally, you have your siblings. So you can list up to 4 siblings, right? And basically just enter your siblings' relationship, right? Their full name, their age, and their highest level of education. Same exact question as on the parent side. So that's your family information. It's a little bit less in-depth than it is on the Common Application, right? And in particular, the big difference is that you don't get that legacy box where you're able to share which colleges your parent or your sibling attended, such that they ended up, in your application, right? So you don't enter that information about which colleges they attended, and so you don't have that same easy way to signal your legacy status at a college.